Premier, can I go to your evidence to the inquiry that you
Certainly.
gave on Friday, please? In your evidence to the inquiry, you were asked specifically about a text message from your private office to Mr. Tim Ada, a DepSec in Premier's department at 1:19, and you said that that text message from your private office to your department references security.
Yes.
You said that those decisions would not have been made yet, they were not finalised, and I quote you, not at this time anyway, Maziliard.
Yes.
That's at 1:19,
Yes.
but obviously today, upon his resignation, Mr. Eccles clearly made a call to Graham Ashton at 1:17, so 2 minutes earlier.
Yes.
That is the only person, according to Mr. Ashton's evidence, that he had contact with in that 6-minute period.
Yes.
So clearly Graham Ashton was told by Mr. Eccles something of substance for Mr. Ashton to then be telling Reece Kershaw and the Australian Federal Police that, and he did this in a following text message at 1:22, that we will not be involved, Vicpol, we will not be involved in hotel security. And Reece Kershaw says, well, that's new. And he says, yes, this is a deal done with our DPC. That would seem that your evidence to the inquiry in relation to your staff's knowledge at 1:19 and the text message from your private office is at odds with a 1:17 call from your now former head of Premiers to the police chief.
Well, I don't draw the same conclusion that you've drawn. The text message from one of my staff was about the security, not who would provide security, and it was a question. The mere fact that a question had to be asked, I would have thought, put beyond doubt that the answer was not known. I then went out and did a media conference where, yes, I did mention a number of different classes of person, if you like, whether it be police, private security, or our health team, and in the very next breath in that press conference, I indicated that those matters had not been settled and I couldn't make announcements, but that I would the following day make those announcements, and I did. And I think if you have a look at the evidence that's been led to the inquiry about other meetings, other processes that had nothing to do with my private office or my department for that matter. Meetings, for instance, down at the State Control Centre, I'm not drawing conclusions or offering theories. That's not my job, and it's not appropriate given that there's a process ongoing. But my statements have been clear, accurate, consistent.
Well, Premier, can I just go then back to the National Cabinet meeting? The National Cabinet meeting concluded at 1:11 p.m, and I have that clarified from a number of official sources. But at 12 noon, according to Mr. Eccles' own evidence in the code inquiry, he left the room. He left the room and spoke to, as we know, Simon Femister, the Secretary of the Jobs Department, who then had a series of meetings, including meetings at 12:35. They've been led in evidence that discussed both Victoria Police and quite in detail private security. That's in evidence. When Mr. Eccles left the Cabinet room, he said he only spoke to Mr. Femister to action the standing up of hotel rooms and the provision of transport. When asked in evidence, Mr. Eccles said he did not discuss private security. However, within 20 minutes, that was part of meetings at which Mr. Femister was chairing while you were still inside National Cabinet, which didn't break till after 1.
Yes.
But interestingly, when you carefully read through the evidence of Mr. Eccles, en route to a place where he could call Mr. Femister, he walked through the ante-room, spoke to your Chief of Staff, and briefed her in detail, according to Mr. Eccles' evidence, about the decision of National Cabinet, which at that stage was not known to anyone inside the Victorian Public Service, that it would require immediate hotel quarantine of incoming passengers. So the only two people, while National Cabinet was underway, between 12 and 1:15 when it broke, that knew about this decision was Mr. Eccles when he left, who told your Chief of Staff, who then told Mr. Femister. Eccles then told Mr. Femister. Now, Mr. Femister has been on the record, he's given a statement, he's provided evidence.
Yeah.
So has Mr. Ashton, so has your good self. But your Chief of Staff has not given evidence in any way, shape or form. I understand phone records will come.
They will.
But there is no evidence led by her into the inquiry and no statement.
Yes.
As to what she knew and whether she had subsequent discussions in relation to private security.
And your question is?
Did your Chief of Staff, while you were in National Cabinet and your Secretary had departed at 12 noon, in that period of time, did your Chief of Staff have conversations with anyone in relation to private security before the National Cabinet decision was known publicly?
Well, I'm not quite sure. You've just put it to me that she didn't know until after the meeting broke.
No, I'm not putting that to you.
Well, you
She
did.
was told, no, excuse me, Premier.
Well, you did put that to
She
me,
was
but
told-
regardless, that I can still answer the question
She was
without.
told by Mr Eccles, and he says that in his evidence when
Yeah.
he left the room at 12.
Yep. I'm still unclear. You're free to make long statements, but if you've got a question, please ask me the question so I can answer it. I want to be as accurate as I can be.
Well, when Mr Eccles
These
left
sort of
the
lengthy
room,
silences at the end of it, I need to know what I'm being asked, and then I'm more than happy to try and answer you.
when Mr Eccles left the room at 12 o'clock,
Yes.
he told your Chief of Staff that there was a decision in relation to National Cabinet to stand up hotel quarantine of incoming passengers. He then called Mr Femister
Yes.
and told Mr Femister to look at hotel rooms and transport only. And that's in the evidence of Femister, and that's in the evidence of
Yep.
Mr Eccles.
Yes.
The one person's evidence who we don't have is your Chief of Staff,
Right.
but somewhere in that period of time, between then and this call by Mr Eccles at 1:17 to Mr Ashton, that gave him comfort that private security would be used, sometime between 12 and 1:17, your Chief of Staff was informed of a National Cabinet decision and work was underway in the Victorian Public Service, and I would contend perhaps even your private office, to look at private security arrangements.
Well, if that's your question, matters as to who would perform functions within the hotel quarantine program are operational decisions. They are not decisions that are made by me nor any member of my private office staff. So that's the first answer. Beyond that, as to who is called and not called, as to who is required or asked to provide information or details to the Board of Inquiry, that's entirely a matter for the Board. All the evidence that's been led has come from requests that the Board has made. All the 300,000 pages of documents, again, they've come from requests. The most recent request of the Board were phone records. They will be provided in full accordance with the terms of the request made. But on the broader issue, or any contention that anybody in my private office would be making operational decisions like that, that's just simply not right.
Can I ask you a question? In relation to the standard form contracts for the provision of private security at the hotels, there's a standard requirement in all the contracts, and they commenced from, as you know, the night you stood everything up on the 29th of March. The decision obviously was taken on the Friday, or the National Cabinet decision was taken. You announced it in your press conference at 3 o'clock. But in the standard form contracts, there is a requirement that everyone who is working in private security in these COVID hotels must have already completed the Australian Federal Government's COVID-19 online control course. And even before National Cabinet broke, as I said, just after 1 o'clock, one of the companies that eventually got a contract worth $30 million, called Unified Security, was given a heads up because it demanded its staff on Friday the 27th of March at 12:36 that they all had to comply, do the federal government course, and that they must do it by 2:30 p.m, at which time we know was when the Prime Minister was announcing that there would be hotel quarantine. Now, the mere fact that this company who got a $30 million contract is saying at 12:36 on the Friday to its employees, before National Cabinet had even broken up, that this course must be done, that is a requirement that was in the term of all of your state government contracts, and that the only people privy to the decision of National Cabinet, which had yet to broken up, was Mr Eccles, who left the room and spoke to your Chief of Staff and spoke to Simon Femister. I'm asking you again, surely your chief of staff, who has not given evidence and has not given a statement to the inquiry, you say you set the inquiry up for transparency to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah.
This would seem at odds with transparency. Should your chief of staff provide evidence to the inquiry?
Who the inquiry seeks evidence from and the nature of any requests they make is entirely a matter for them. Entirely a matter for them. And I understand that whether it be Unified Security or other security providers have made submissions, they've cross-examined witnesses, they have asked many questions and put their view, as they see things.
Now, Mr. David Milwood did give testimony, Premier.
No,
He didn't give any
I
testimony.
didn't name that individual. I've named any individual. That I was cross-examined by their barrister, so I don't think it's a point of contention that they are part of the inquiry. I really don't think that.
No, I'm not saying
you
that
could argue
because
that.
I'm reading from his exhibit, but what I'm saying was you were not questioned over this discrepancy because I
Well-
don't think people picked up that Mr. Eccles left at 12 o'clock.
Indeed, what I was questioned on is a matter for the board and council assisting and any other parties that were part of that process. The inquiry has got a job to do. Who they call, what they look at, is entirely a matter for them. And I think it is perhaps unfair to somehow run a commentary on anyone who's not appeared at this inquiry as somehow having done the wrong thing. The inquiry determines who turns up and what they're asked, and then draws conclusions from that. And let me be very clear with you and everyone, I have no involvement whatsoever in who gets called. None at all. Nor do I have any involvement in what they're asked. Nor do I have any involvement, or anyone in the government have any involvement in the submissions that were led by council assisting.
But
A
you
lengthy
set the
process and a
inquiry
very
up,
important
Premier,
one.
You set the inquiry up, you determined
did,
its
yes.
terms of reference.
I'm pleased to
You
pleased you
determined that it
acknowledge
was established as a board of inquiry as opposed to a royal commission with far greater powers than it has. Before the National Cabinet broke up at 1 o'clock, your now former departmental head left the room and communicated the decision in depth to your chief of staff, so says his evidence, and spoke to Simon Femister, so says his evidence. Simon Femister then went off and started to look at a whole range of detailed arrangements in relation to private security at quarantine hotels. That is no creeping assumption to me or to anyone else who can put together a timeline. And we now know that when the meeting broke up at 1:11, very quickly there was a message from Graham Ashton asking, are Vic Pole involved in this? And we now know a call that's led to the resignation of your departmental chief at 1:17 after a 1:16 incoming text to Eccles.
Yes.
Mr. Eccles calls back Mr. Ashton and says it's all okay because he went around, as you know, in subsequent texts to the AFP
Well, no.
saying
See,
that there is a
that's where,
special deal.
No. Let's be very clear. I don't know what was said on that call. We don't know what was said on that call. You can offer a theory, you can offer a construction
Well,
of events.
I'm offering a
but what I'd say
construction
with the
based on
greatest
a
of
former
respect,
police chief's
what I would
text
say,
messages.
yes, and with the greatest of respect, it is not for me, and therefore I won't be trying to draw conclusions from that. There's a process that's been set up to make exactly those judgments, and many others.
What instructions did you give Mr. Eccles before he left the room? Because in his evidence, and you were not asked about this, in Mr. Eccles' evidence, he says, I had a conversation with the Premier in National Cabinet before I left the room at 12 o'clock.
He's sitting
that was
beside
not
me.
pursued.
He's sitting beside me in the National Cabinet.
Correct. And he said he had a conversation with you prior to leaving at 12 noon when
Yes.
he spoke to your chief of staff, and we don't know what that substance was about. And we know that he spoke to Mr. Femister because Mr. Eccles and Mr. Femister have given evidence. And we now know from all the material led to the inquiry that there was work done immediately on private security, and you yourself announced it at 3:15 that same day.
No.
What did you
no,
say
no,
to
no,
Mr.
no,
Eccles
no,
as you left the room?
No such announcement was made at 3:15 that day.
Yes, there was.
No.
In your transcript, you mentioned private security.
Yes, and
And your press release, you mentioned private security.
and you have I'm sorry to say, not mentioned the very next sentence in that press conference, the transcript, the video of which is very clear, where I indicated that these matters had not been settled and I would not be able to make announcements as to the structure of the program until they had been settled. That is a rather important omission in your construction of events.
Well, if I can conclude, it was settled at the 4 o'clock meeting that went on after
which is
finished.
somewhat after, well, if it were or weren't, is a matter for the board to determine, not for me. I'm not advancing theories on those matters. I was asked about it and I've answered absolutely accurately. But I suppose you can't quite have it both ways. That I said something at 3:15, but it didn't happen till 4. Like, what I'm saying to you is that if you read on to literally the very next breath in the press conference that I gave, I made it abundantly clear that I could not make announcements about these very matters because they had not been settled.
No,
What's more, if I
there
can
was a
say,
decision to take.
what's more, if I can say, these matters are not settled by me nor my Chief of Staff. These are operational matters, and they are not only as a function of custom and practice, but in many respects a function of statutory responsibilities. The Chief Commissioner cannot be directed on any matter by me. The Emergency Management Commissioner cannot be directed, other than in very limited circumstances and inconveniently for this construction, by me. I am not his minister. So in any event, the board will look at all of these matters, all of them, and indeed more.
The board didn't ask you what conversation you had with Mr. Eccles prior to him leaving the National Cabinet meeting.
Well, I
at
can
12
assure
o'clock.
you I did not advise him or discuss with him doing things that would be of a deeply operational nature.
Did you have a conversation
No
with
such
Mr.
conversation
Eccles?
ever occurred, nor
Did
has
you
any
have a
evidence been led to
conversation,
suggest that.
Premier, did you have a conversation with Mr. Eccles at any point at which you left the room at 12 noon in relation to security regarding
No.
hotels?
No,
No conversation at all?
no.
Just on the chat
Well, otherwise, how could I answer the question about I was asked a very direct question. Do I know who made that decision? Under oath, I answered that question, no. So, of course, the answer to your question is similarly, no. And I would make the point, I've made one submission to the inquiry, just one. I've not needed to correct or add to any of the evidence I gave because I have been, as I am in all matters, accurate. That is the truth of this, and we'll await the findings. I also note that in submissions made by counsel assisting, there was no reflection on anything that I had said. In any event, we all must wait. As frustrating as that might be, we all must wait until early November when we receive the report of the board.
Can I just ask you, yesterday you talked about those phone records, and I understand directly from Lisa Neville's office that she has not been asked for records, and that no one else in the Department of Premier and Cabinet beyond Mr. Eccles have been yet asked for their records. I've had that verified. You discussed yesterday about the type of material to be provided. Because it's on request of the telecommunications carrier as opposed to a warrant, it will not and cannot include encrypted material because that's not within the scope of the telecommunications carrier unless it's warranted under federal power. Will your office willingly provide their devices so that, because the devices will keep the encrypted material even if the carrier can't provide it, will you provide access to, Confide,
Happy to.
Slack, Signal, WhatsApp?
We're happy to.
That means handing over
fully
the phones,
comply
though.
with the request that's been made. I don't use WhatsApp very much. I'll tell you who put me onto WhatsApp. Scott Morrison did, because that's where the National Cabinet feed is. I've been very clear. We've been asked for this communication. I'm ambivalent on what platform was used. We will fully comply and provide all information. We'll provide all information to the Board of Inquiry.
You've
We
been
will-
asked
we
for
will do that.
information by your carrier, and the problem I'm saying is the carrier
Well, I
doesn't
don't see it
keep-
as a problem because we're happy to hand over the lot. which is what I said the other day. I'm ambivalent, unconcerned, not particularly interested in what platform any communications were on. We will provide all of it, and that's exactly what we've said, and that's exactly what we'll do.
Okay, you just said then, just a minute ago, that you've thought very deeply about the day on the 27th of March.
Yes.
I've been in a room when you have been briefed in joint press conferences with a former Prime Minister. I have been there when you have been briefed by your staff for those press conferences. And you are one of the most meticulous press conference preparers I have seen in a senior politician, meticulous in your preparation. I want to ask you why, when you had your press conference on the 27th of March and announced that there would be the use of private security, and I've got the quotes from your transcript exactly, you talk about private security, you make mention of our health team, the compliance in static locations, hotels, etc. You say that, and then there's also a written press release.
Yes.
Why would you say that there would be private security used on that day if you hadn't made the decision, or you weren't aware of who made the decision?
Well, a couple of points. Firstly, thank you so much for your very kind characterisation of my professionalism. That's very pleased, and we'll put that on the record. That's nice. But again, if I can, with the greatest of respect, nothing but respect, you have again selectively quoted from and reinterpreted what I said at the press conference. I made no such announcement. I did not announce anything. I talked about the fact that no decisions had been made, and that I in fact could not make announcements, and that I would make those announcements the following day, and I duly did. So I think it's just important. I'm well placed to remember what I said, and I can tell you what I said, and the transcript confirms it, and the video of it confirms it. I talked about police, private security, and our public health team. And then in the very next sentence, I went on almost apologetically to the assembled media, because it was later in the day than I would normally appear. And I knew off the bat that I was not going to be able to answer a whole range of questions, because, as I indicated, decisions had not yet been made. What's more, what I didn't necessarily say, but what is absolutely the fact of the matter, is that they're not decisions that are made by me. I have neither the power nor the inclination to be interfering in deeply operational matters. I'll go no further than that, because if I do, I'll be speculating about what did or did not occur at the State Control Centre. And that is not, I don't know that, and I am confining myself to what I know. I don't think I can relevantly speculate or helpfully speculate. That's a matter for the board to look at.
At 2 o'clock, Lisa Neville, in a meeting with Mr Crisp and Mr Ashton, declared that private security would be used and the Victoria Police would not be used, and that was an hour before your media appearance at 3:15.
Well, I'm not entirely certain that that's what she said.
That's in her evidence at
again,
the code inquiry.
The inquiry can make judgments about the totality of her evidence, the totality of all evidence.
But she's one of your ministers. If you want to get to the bottom of
I'm
this,
well
surely
aware.
you've asked her.
Well, no, I think you might need to have a think about and have a look at whether she was asked a very direct question from the inquiry about whether she knows who made this decision. I haven't gone and reread her transcript, but I'm pretty sure that question would have been put to her, and I'm pretty confident in the answer she would have given.
I've read very carefully what she said this morning, and she was pointedly asked a question from Mr Ashton about Victoria Police, and she made it very clear Victoria Police would not be used at 2 o'clock, and she reiterated that it was a choice that private security will be used.
Well, was she asked a question about whether she knew who made that decision? I don't have her transcript in front of me, and this is not really a forum where I get to ask you questions, but if I might be allowed, I think she was asked whether she knew, and I think I know what her answer was. In any event, I'm not going to be spending my time trawling through evidence led to an inquiry that would rather defeat the purpose of having an inquiry, which is a costly matter, but one I think that is very important. That's why I established it. That's why I'll let them write the report, because after all, they're the inquiry, and I'm not going to mark my own work. I've never sought to run an internal inquiry about these matters, other than very early on, the day of, when I started asking questions and I couldn't get answers. It's at that point, literally hours later, just hours later, I stood right here and announced that there would be a board of inquiry. It took us a few days to settle on terms of reference and the retired judge to conduct it, but they began their work pretty much immediately. And it's my view that we should wait and see what the product of that inquiry is, which will be rather a thick report, rather a lengthy report, I would think, with recommendations, with findings, and we'll respond and take the decisive action required to make sure that these types of mistakes can never happen again.